Good evening and welcome once again to another program of Issues in the News, where we discuss the important events that would have taken place in Guyana over the past week or so. And as is the norm, we always have a packed agenda of issues to discuss. I want to begin by welcoming our viewers who are joining us on television from region number 5, West Coast Berbice. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. To those of you who are joining us on the east bank of the Berbice River in Region 6, New Amsterdam, Kanji, the Quarantine Coast, and all the way to Oriala and Siparuta, all of you who are joining us in Region 6 on television, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. To our friends who are joining us on Freedom Radio from Rob Street, Georgetown, Guyana, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And last but not least, to the thousands of you who are joining us on Facebook Live, welcome to another program of Issues in the News from across the length and breadth of Guyana, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, Asia, and all the way in the Middle East and Australia. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. Please remember to press that share button on your phone. Share this live on your computer, on your laptop, on your iPad, or whatever device you're using to look at the program. Share it, share the live so that your friends, your followers, and all of those who are on your account and on your pages can join us in tonight's discussion. Again, please share this program, share it wide and far so that we can have the largest possible audience joining us in tonight's discussion. Tonight, I want to do a special program. I want us to interrogate a concept that was proffered by a very distinguished Guyanese scholar, an international lawyer, by the name of Dr. Bertrand Ramcharan. For those who may not know, Dr. Ramcharan, as I said, is a distinguished international lawyer. He was chairman of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. He was also the 7th Chancellor of the University of Guyana. He has a PhD in law and, as I said, is highly qualified. Dr. Ramcharan wrote an article on the 27th of August 2024 in the Stabroek News. And in that article, he proffered a contention that Guyana and the government of Guyana exhibits shades of autocracy, and that the government and Guyana may be categorized as autocratic. Now, autocracy is like the opposite of democracy. An autocratic government or an autocratic state is equivalent to a dictatorship where there is a concentration of power in one person who exercises it in an authoritarian and dictatorial manner. It is not a democracy. It is not a democratic government. And those who are in charge of the state and the government do not practice the rules of democracy, the principles of democracy, and the concepts of democracy in the discharge of their governmental functions. That is what this gentleman has accused the government of Guyana of. And I want to, firstly, I want to reject vehemently that categorization and classification of the government of Guyana and indeed the state of Guyana. I feel, as Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, it is my duty to do so. So I reject his categorization, I reject his hypothesis, I reject his contention, I reject his classification. Now I want to discuss with you the reasons for me taking the position which I have taken. And it is important that we discuss these concepts. Some of you may find it boring, but I hope that I am able to keep your interest for the next 50 minutes or so as I discuss with you the reasons why I believe that he is wrong. And as I said, this program is intended for us to educate each other. And that is what I would like us to do tonight, to examine the governance structure in Guyana, to determine whether it is autocratic or democratic. Now, Guyana, like many other countries of the world, is governed by a constitution. And we have now been an independent state for nearly 6 decades. So our constitution, its provisions, its model, its architecture, and its structure is well known. And it has been examined by critics, by academics, and by judges alike. And never has there been an allegation or a contention that Guyana's constitutional structure is undemocratic in its nature or inherently. In other words, from all the analysis and examination that has been done of the Guyana Constitution, save and except in 1980, and let me make an exception. Save and except the 1980 Constitution, which was reformed massively in 1999 to 2001, save that period, because that Constitution for that period, allegations have been made, and rightfully so, that it was inherently undemocratic and that there was a high concentration of power in the executive presidency. That I will concede, and the PPP itself, our government, our political party rather, is on record as saying so. So let's discount that period. Other than that, the Constitution of Guyana from 1966 to 1979 and from 2001 to date have been examined and have been found to be a democratic instrument. The constitution of a country is that principal document, that basic document of the state that establishes a contract between the state and the citizens. In that document, it outlines how the state will be managed, how the state will be governed, and by whom, and how those who govern the state are to be elected, where they will get money from to manage the state, how they will account for those monies and how they will spend those monies. It also has a regime of what you call independent organizations and institutions in the Constitution itself, whose functions are to view the government, to scrutinize the government, to ensure that the government behaves properly, that the government executes its functions in accordance with law and in accordance with the Constitution. And when the government misbehaves or does not comply with the law and the Constitution, what remedies exist. And this independent grouping of organizations are also to be staffed by a regime set out in the Constitution that protects the appointment process of how these people are to be appointed to these institutions. And while they are functioning, there is also a regime of protection to grant them independence and functional autonomy to ensure that the government can't interfere with them. And then there is another part of the Constitution that is called the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution that guarantees the citizen the basic human rights that are guaranteed to all citizens of the world. And if there is any violation of these basic fundamental human rights, the government can be taken to the court, or one of these watchdog agencies can be approached by the citizens to take actions against the government. So in a nutshell, that is what the Constitution does. And Guyana's Constitution, as I said, meets all the international requirements in respect of constitutions that govern other countries, larger countries, the United States of America, India, which is regarded as the largest democracy on earth, Canada, South Africa, and many other countries. The Caribbean is right here in our backyard. All these countries have constitutions that are similar to ours. In fact, I will advance the proposition that Guyana's constitution is more liberal, is more democratic, and is more advanced than any other country in the Caribbean. And I can debate that at any forum. So we have to begin with the proposition that Guyana has the constitutional architecture in place that qualifies it as a democracy and not an autocracy. That's the first proposition which I want to advance. As I said, no one can look at Guyana's architecture, Guyana's constitutional architecture, and Guyana's legal architecture and advance the contention that that architecture is somewhat undemocratic in its nature or inherently, or that it is autocratic in its nature. So Dr. Ramcharan, the bright man that he is, the qualified man that he is, could not have meant when he argues that Guyana has shades of autocracy, that it was its constitutional or governmental architecture. He could not have meant that, could not have meant that. Could not. Because that doesn't exist in Guyana. Because, as I said, Guyana's constitution has been examined, interrogated, and upheld as democratic as any other. And I am advancing the postulation that it is more democratic than any other country in the Caribbean. And in the course of my discourse tonight, I will give you a few examples to demonstrate why I posit that view. So then, what is Dr. Ramcharan referring to? Dr. Ramcharan, therefore, must be referring to not the structure of the Constitution, not the constitutional architecture. He must therefore be classifying Guyana as an autocracy based upon the way that the government is functioning and the way that the state is being governed. So let us examine that. And let us begin with the fact that we have a democratic architecture. So let us start with how the government was elected. And elections are still fresh in your minds. Since the PPP has assumed government in 1992, every single elections held under a PPP government was observed by internationally certified observers of the highest caliber who observe elections right across the globe, and each of those organizations from 1992 to 2020 have certified those elections to be free, fair, and transparent. That is not disputed. It cannot be disputed. I believe Ramcharan himself concedes that in his article. The 2020 elections, as you know, they were miscreants who attempted to rig the elections and steal the franchise of the people. And it is our government, while we were in opposition, the international community, the judiciary, and the population that fought those attempts and succeeded in getting the government elected by the people sworn in to office. So at the level of the elections, the government of Guyana was democratically elected. No one can question that. And as the CCJ said, in the case of Mohammed Irfan Ali and Bharat Jagdeo against Eslin David, this is one of the cases that went to the CCJ after the March 2nd elections. The president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, President Adrian Saunders, says this: the Constitution professes the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to be a democratic sovereign state, and elections that are free, fair, transparent, and accountable are the lifeblood of a true democracy. Not me saying so. Adrian Saunders, president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Guyana's highest court, not the Court of Appeal, the highest court. This is the judiciary now that I spoke about, whose function is to scrutinize the executive and to be the judge of all actions in the country, is certifying that Guyana is a democratic, sovereign state, and elections that are free, fair, and transparent are the lifeblood of a true democracy. This very court, in this judgment and other judgments of approximate time, ruled that those elections were free, fair, and transparent. And therefore, you have the lifeblood of a true democracy intact. So here you have a pronouncement that rejects Ramcharan's classification, and that's coming from the highest court in the country. So the government is democratically elected. So you have a democratically elected government in place. And once you have that, that is the lifeline of a democracy. That is what the court is saying. So we have in Guyana a lifeblood of democracy at work. So that's another given I want to establish as we move forward. The Constitution, as I said, like many other constitutions in the world, is built upon the doctrine of separation of powers. Guyana Constitution has that, whereby you have the government performing executive functions, and that is governing the country, ensuring that the laws are enforced, ensuring that taxes are collected, ensuring that the state is managed financially, etc. And then you have the parliament, and the parliament's function is manifold, but the main and principal functions are to pass the laws and pass budgets, ensure that there is financial scrutiny of government spending, ensuring that governments account to Parliament for spendings, and also to discuss major policies. Now, is the Parliament functioning? The answer to that must be yes. Is the Parliament passing laws? We, in this Parliament, of this government, from 2020 to now, we have passed more laws than any other country in the Caribbean. I repeat, from August 2020, we have passed more laws than any other country in the English-speaking Caribbean. And I will say, perhaps the whole Commonwealth. Is Parliament performing its accounting function, or the scrutinizing function of the accounts of the government? Certainly. Certainly. Budgets are approved by the Parliament. Supplementary provisions are approved by the Parliament. Votes are taken and counted in the Parliament. Decisions are made by vote. Is the Parliament meeting frequently? Yes, the Parliament is meeting frequency. And then the Parliament has a whole host of committees that perform different functions. Is the Public Accounts Committee functioning? Yes. Is the Auditor General auditing government's accounts annually? Yes. Is that Auditor General report scrutinized by the Public Accounts Committee, which is chaired by the opposition? Yes. Are bills taken to Select Committee? Yes. Are the Select Committee that has the responsibility of appointing members to different commissions, are those committees functioning? Yes. In fact, let me part company now to say that Guyana is the only country in the Caribbean where bodies such as the three main watchdog bodies, which are the Public Service Commission, the Police Service Commission, the Teaching Service Commission, and the Judicial Service Commission, they are all appointed through a process in the Parliament, where all the parliamentarians have a say, where the President has a nominee, the Leader of the Opposition has a nominee, and the other nominees come from the Parliament. I am saying to you that there is no other country in the Caribbean where the Parliament has a role in the appointment of those commissions. And the Parliament, as you obviously know, comprises of the government and the opposition. So where is the autocracy? But I'll go on. Let us take the judiciary now, and the judiciary is one of the main organ that ensures democratic conduct, constitutional compliance, and that the government acts in a transparent and lawful manner. Also, that the citizens comply with the laws. Do we have a judiciary? Certainly we have a judiciary. One of the cornerstones of a democracy is that that judiciary must be independent. Is the judiciary of Guyana independent? Certainly it is. Are judges appointed in a fair, transparent manner? Certainly it is. They are appointed through a process of recruitment by the Judicial Service Commission, another independent body, and they take the oath before the president. Not the president picking and choose, not the government choosing who are to be judges. The Judicial Service Commission, an independent body, recruits persons and sends those names to the president. If the president disagrees with any nomination, he is to send it back to the Judicial Service Commission. If the Judicial Service Commission reconsiders that name and sends it to the president must appoint. Now that particular process, this latter process, is not extant in any of the Caribbean territories, where the president must accept a nomination from the Judicial Service Commission. That is absent in the rest of the Caribbean. The judiciary is headed by a chancellor and the Chief Justice. The chancellor and the Chief Justice are both appointed by an agreement between the president and the leader of the opposition. Has the president violated that and appointed one of his own choosing? No. Has any PPP president ever done that? No. But remember, when you have a similar process for the appointment of the GCOM chair, Granger appointed one of his own choosing. But I don't want to digress. I just give you that as an example. In relation to the appointment of a chancellor and Chief Justice, again, there is no such parallel in the entire Commonwealth. There is no parallel position where the leader of the opposition and the head of the government must agree to these appointments. That position which obtains in Guyana does not obtain anywhere else in the Caribbean. Where is this autocracy that this man is talking about? So, is the judiciary independent in its functioning? Now, one of the main ways of ensuring that a judiciary is independent is to ensure that it is financed through independent means. Of course, it is financed through the treasury. But what role does the government play? And the government is in charge of finance. The government is in charge of finance as per the Constitution. What role does the government play in financing the judiciary? In Guyana, we have a system, again, that is quite different from the rest of the Caribbean, where the judiciary makes up its own budget and takes it directly to the Ministry of Finance. In the other countries, it is done through the budget of the Attorney General. Here, the judiciary goes to the Ministry of Finance and says, this is our budget. The finance minister looks at the budget and says, I can't afford to give you all this money this year. I can only afford to give you X amount of money. And that is the right of a finance minister. That is the power of a government under our Constitution. Because the government is responsible for the financial affairs of the state. The government must determine affordability and what is not affordable. So the government, through the Ministry of Finance, says to the judiciary, we can only give you 1.5 billion this year, not 2 billion, for example. The judiciary now goes back and freely restructures its budget to meet the affordability of what the government can give for that year. So that the Minister of Finance doesn't cut out of the budget That's not the Minister of Finance function. The judiciary goes back, restructures its budget independently, and then submits it in accordance with the affordability suggested by the Finance Minister. That budget is then taken to the National Assembly, and it is not questioned. It is approved as a lump sum. Not questioned. Every other budget is questioned, but not the constitutional agencies. None of the constitutional agencies that are independent, their budgets are not questioned by the National Assembly. They are approved in lump sum. When they are approved and they are directly disbursed, not through any other agency, but directly from the Finance Ministry to the particular Constitutional Commission at periodic intervals in accordance with that budget. So there is no possibility of the government using any power to stifle the finances of any of these bodies, more so the judiciary. So you have complete financial independence as enshrined by the Constitution. So you have the appointment process independent, you have the financing process independent. Let's go now to the functioning of the judiciary. Have you ever heard of an allegation? Guyana is a country replete with allegations. All kinds of allegations you're hearing. You ever hear an allegation that a government minister or a functionary of the government ever gave a judge any instruction? You ever hear that even as a rumor? Why? You never heard that? Because it never happens. It never happens. The judiciary is functionally independent. Now, Ramcharan argues that the government has been critical of the judiciary in instances where the judiciary has made certain rulings. Yes, and that is a democratic part of the equation. That is the democratic right of a government. If the judiciary is free to rule how it wants, the government is free to criticize the judiciary. The ruling of the judiciary, when it is against the government, is a criticism of the government. Criticism is a two-way street. And it is part of freedom of expression. It is part of the democratic polity of a country. So yes, we can criticize the judiciary. What we cannot do is do it in a disrespectful manner. We can't cast or impute illicit motives or improper motives to a judge. But I can tell a judge that the judge is wrong. I don't agree with that decision. Of course I can do that. Of course a minister of the government or the government can do that. An ordinary member of the public can do that. And we do it. And we appeal. And let me tell you what the track record of the Court of Appeal is. And you see, we have to talk these things if you're having a discussion and you want to know whether we are autocratic or democratic. The Court of Appeal of Guyana has ruled against the government in politically typed cases over 99% of the time. And on every occasion, the government appeals to the CCJ and the decision is reversed. It is reversed. Are you talking about freedom or independence of the judiciary? The judiciary in political matters, the record is they rule against the government, at least at the Court of Appeal level. And that's statistics. And when you go to the Caribbean Court of Justice, the decisions are reversed. So where is this autocracy? Where is the autocracy as opposed to a democracy? So you have the three basic arms of government functioning in a manner contemplated by the Constitution. with no allegation whatsoever of any form of interference. None. So, please send me your comments. I know that I want to go through this thing step by step so that you understand how government works and why Ramcharan cannot be right in what he has contended. So, let us go outside of the three branches now and deal with the other watchdog organizations. No, but before I go there, let me go back to the judiciary. We have a court established that deals only with constitutional and public law cases. And we established that court. That court hears cases against the government only. Constitutional cases and public law cases are cases that are filed against the government, where they are alleging that the government breached the Constitution or the government's decision in some area of activity is contrary to the rules of natural justice, capricious, contrary to law, high-handed, discriminatory, etc. That a special court deals with that. A special court. Not many countries have that. We have a Judicial Review Act that allows every citizen to question almost any decision of the government, of the state, of any minister, of any public officer in that court. And you don't have to show locus standi, you don't have to get leave, you just go to court and you file it. This government approves billions and billions of dollars annually to the judiciary to build court systems, courthouses all across this country so that citizens of the country can have access to justice. Look at what is going on in the magistrates' court in relation to the election fraud trials. The government has ever threatened that magistrate or has ever attempted to direct that magistrate? Of course, you have been critical of the conduct of the magistrate or the conduct of the way the cases have been unfolding. You members of the public have been critical. Why a government can't be critical? Government doesn't have rights. That is what a democracy is about. Being able to criticize each other without the fear of recrimination. When our government does that, we are apparently autocratic. Let us go to the basic human rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution. Again, I say to you that if you go through our Constitution, we have the broadest Bill of Rights scheme when compared to the rest of the Caribbean. We have rights that are there that are not guaranteed to citizens of the Caribbean. There is no constitution in the Caribbean that guarantees as a basic human rights the right to pension, for example, the right to a clean environment. Constitutions of the Caribbean do not have that as an express fundamental right. Guyana Constitution has it. Your right to pension is not a statutory right under an ordinary law. It is a constitutional right in Guyana. Find another country in the Caribbean where such a right exists. We have a right to free and a clean environment. And with many more rights. We have 10 additional rights. 10 rights that are not in the rest of the Caribbean. 10. Additional to what they have. We have 10. How, on what basis you are telling me that Guyana is not, and our government is not democratic? And these rights are not illusory. You can sue. You can take the government to court to enforce any of these rights in that constitutional court. So let's move on. Freedom of the press, a very important right. Do we have freedom of press in Guyana? I am saying to you that what we have in Guyana is almost an abuse of freedom of the press. We have so much freedom in the press that there is an abuse of freedom in the press. But maybe by saying that, I will be labeled autocratic. The fact that Mr. Ramcharan could have published that article in the Stabrook News without even an official response from the government is evidence without more that there is freedom of press at work, that this is a democracy. You think if we were an autocratic regime, he could have published that? He could have published that because he's maligning the government wrongly. But he has a right to do so. And we have a right to respond. And when we respond, apparently we are autocratic. That is not autocracy, my friend. That is a part and parcel of democracy. The right to respond, the right of reply, is a fundamental tenet of free expression and freedom of speech. But apparently government doesn't have that. But let me continue. We have 2 newspapers in the country who are dedicatedly critical of the government. 2 daily newspapers who their entire editorial policy seem to be critical of the government. And that is part of the democratic architecture of the country. But you can't now say that there is autocracy. You have people who are using the social media. You have about 50 news agencies on the social media. More than half of them are anti-government, and they publish anti-government stories all day. That is part of the democracy. We are bringing regulation to cyberspace. We have to. And anybody who feels that cyberspace must be left unregulated is simply uneducated. They are simply uneducated. I don't have anything else to say. Cyberspace is being used and abused across the globe. Every country is regulating it. It's being used for child pornography, it's being used for credit card fraud, it's being used for money laundering, it's being used for identity theft, it's being used for cyberbullying, it is being used for extortion, blackmail. All kinds of illegalities are committed in cyberspace. And you have a political leader who says that it must not be regulated. It must not be regulated. You cannot take these people seriously. But I diverted it. Let me come back to this theme that we are discussing. So let's go to the watchdog organizations. We have about 5 rights commissions that are there, that different classes of citizens can go and lodge complaints against the government, against the state. And these bodies are independent, and they have a whole host of powers to take remedial actions. You have persons can go there and complain about discrimination. You have the Racial Discrimination Commission, Anti-Racial Discrimination Commission. You have the Rights of the Child Commission. You have the Indigenous Peoples Commission. All these are commissions, and these commissions are not in the other constitutions of the Caribbean. They are not there. Then you have the Ombudsman. You have as I said, the Police Complaints Authority, the Police Service Commission, Public Service Commission, Teacher Service Commission. These commissions are independent. They employ public servants. They employ police officers. They discipline them. Not government. And these bodies are staffed, as I said, by nominees from the government, nominees from the opposition, and nominees from the parliament. And they run the public service. They run the police service. They run the judicial service. How can you say that Guyana is an autocracy? And there was an allegation that NGOs are being pressured by the government. That's an allegation by Ramcharan. Which NGOs? Which NGOs being pressured by the government? They have certain, and 90% of the NGOs, as you know, are anti-government, and they are allowed to function. They are anti-government, and they are allowed to function. Whole day they are critical of the government. The Guyana Human Rights Commission, you have the Transparency International, you have Red Thread, and you can name them. All anti-government, all are allowed to function. So, where is the autocracy? The Transparency International filed a case to shut down the oil industry in Guyana. The oil industry in Guyana, the main economic industry in Guyana, the main source of revenue in the country, and does not include the government in the lawsuit. They want to shut down the oil and gas industry, of which the government is a part, excludes the government, and when the government goes to the court says that no, we are not joining you, government. The government had to go all the way to the CCJ, and the CCJ joined the Attorney General as a party. That is what you have organizations that are NGOs doing. Imagine the Amerindian People's Association went all the way to Norway and to the international community to block the LCDS, block Guyana from getting millions and millions of US dollars. That is what these organizations are doing. You ever hear one day the government taking any steps against? In fact, the government should be doing much more in respect of these organizations when they are acting contrary to the public's interest, because many of them are. The Human Rights Association of Guyana never criticizes, never issues a statement when someone is killed by an alleged killer. But let the state reacts. Then the human rights organization is activated. It's as if the victim of the crime has no rights. The victim of the crime has no rights. Is the government censoring information in the country? Is anyone prevented from bringing in any type of equipment? Is the government checking what type of equipment is coming in order to bring greater control, to control people, to prohibit them from exercising their rights and freedoms? You ever even hear such an allegation? So where is the autocracy that this gentleman is talking about? And I can go on and continue to give you live examples to show you that democracy is alive in this country. Look at the trade union movement of Guyana. Trade unions represent workers. Are trade unions in Guyana allowed to exercise their rights and their freedoms as trade unions? Of course they are. In fact, trade unions are fronting for politicians in the country. And you see that clearly in the Guyana Teachers Union matter. You see Coretta MacDonald, a politician, a member of parliament, a leader of the opposition, a leading politician in the opposition, pushing the strike when the union, real union members, want to bring the strike to an end. Politicians pushing the workers to strike for political reasons. And when the union and the government actually finds an agreement and signs an agreement, the same politician who is in the union cusses down the union and says the union has sold out to the government. And you're telling me, you're telling me that we don't have a democracy here? And the government has done nothing to her? If it was an autocracy, you think the government would not have responded? Here you have a clear case of a union being penetrated by politician, disguised as a union, fighting a political battle, not a battle for the welfare of teachers. The union executive meets and makes a decision that they are going to accept the government's proposal, and the union leader goes forward and signs the agreement with the government. The politician who is in the union abuses the man publicly, says that he has sold out politically. That is a politician masquerading as a union leader. Yet, government has done nothing. That is democracy. Whether the union wants to allow itself to be manipulated politically, that's a matter for the union. That's a matter for the union. But the record will reflect that the union was not in any form or fashion interfered with by the government or denied by the government its rights to do its union activities. It allowed itself to be prostituted by a politician. That's a matter for the union. I give you these examples and I can give you so many other examples. The leader of the opposition and the opposition parties, every single week they have press conferences and they criticize the government from the beginning to the end. Has there been any attempt to censor them, to silence them? The 99% of the contentions that they are advancing are false as Ramcharan is here. Just the same way that Ramcharan is able to publish these falsehoods, the leader of the opposition, opponents of the government are free to criticize the government. That is a democracy. So, my friends, I have quickly coming to program time now, but I hope that I've given you a narrative supported by law, supported by the Constitution, and supported by examples of real-life events with which you are familiar, in order to establish my rejection of the notion peddled by Ramcharan that Guyana is an autocracy and not a democracy. That proposition of Bertrand Ramcharan is completely without merit, completely erroneous, and I hope that I have been able to convince you tonight that is so. There are a number of other things. Somebody is mentioning about the DPP. I forgot to mention that office holder. Many times people are asking why the government is not charging this person, the government is not charging this person. The government under the Constitution and the laws of Guyana is not empowered or authorized to charge. The government is not an investigative or a charging agency. The investigative arms of the state is largely the Guyana Police Force, the Guyana Revenue Authority, KANU, SOKU, etc. The office that institutes charges and deal with all criminal matters is the Director of Public Prosecutions. That's another independent office. The Constitution says, as it says in relation to every other constitutional body, that that agency must not act subject to the direction or control of any other authority, including the government. You have all these as express provisions of the Constitution. So, my brothers and sisters, thank you very much for spending the last 55 minutes with me. I hope that I have interrogated and explained the concept of whether Guyana is a democracy and an autocracy to your satisfaction. Hopefully you are now in a better place and be in a better position to understand these concepts. So when these things ever come up again, you must be able to reject them out of hand and be able to explain to people how wrong these propositions are. I want to thank you very much for being with me over the past hour or so. We have come to the end of this program. Please enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of the week. Take care, and until I see you again next Tuesday, stay safe and may God bless you. Thank you very much for your attention.